right. Laura, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Hey, welcome to the American Dream podcast, where I believe the dream is still alive. And the reason I believe that is hearing inspirational stories such as yours. So thanks for hopping into the podcast this evening. And maybe you could start with just give us your name, your full name, your date of birth, and country of origin.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's good to know, some stories matter. So my full name's Laura Draghiciu. I am originally born in Romania and in 1985, so I'm well in my 30s. Um, and I've been in the U.S. since 1998, so I'm looking at a strong 24 years now.
Very cool. Where in what city are you from in Romania?
It's a city called Bacău. It's actually in the northeast of the country. It's a good 5-hour drive from the capital. So it's not an easy drive, but it's definitely doable.
Okay, so that's where you were born. And then when you lived in Romania, did you live in the same city or did you live in different cities without the country?
Yeah, so I was in Romania for 13 years before I moved here. So I was barely a teenager, and my dad was originally born in another city, but he met my mom in school in college, and they decided to live where my mom was from, and that's kind of where I grew up, and that was the end of that. Because then my only other city was Philadelphia. So I've been here ever since. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, admittedly, I don't know a lot about Romania. I've been fortunate to travel with my wife to several different countries.
Yeah.
But I've never been to Romania. Why don't you, if you can, tell me a little bit about the country and what do you remember what it was like growing up in Romania?
It's definitely different, different now than when I left it. It's a very beautiful country in terms of just panoramically, you have beautiful countryside. If you like hiking and stuff, going and visiting in the in the country is just gorgeous. And then the cities themselves, they have a lot of history. Depending on where you go, you'll have different feel of the backstory of the country itself because it had many influences. So, like for example, you have Transylvania that had a lot of Germanic influence, and then you had you have the Moldova side, and not Moldova the country, Moldova the area in Romania. It's the same name,
Mhm.
and the South that have a lot of like Russian and Turkish influences. So Romania itself has quite the history because at some point in the past we were, I don't like to use the word owned, but we were colonized, I guess, and to some extent by bigger and stronger forces.
Okay.
So you'll find different influences in terms of like buildings and like foods. Like if you go to Transylvania, you'll have a lot of like Hungarian and German like food and influences, and
Mhm.
it's just different because they've now become part of Romania and who it is. So
Nice. So so you were colonized at one point, and you were a colony of which country or owned by?
not so much a colony, but we were definitely under a different rule. I know that my history is really poor, so
Okay.
I'm not gonna try to claim I know it very well, but Transylvania at one point was part of Austro-Hungary. So it,
Okay.
yeah, and I think only in the last 100 or so years, maybe less. I don't know. I'm really bad with
Mhm.
history, so has it really been united under like one country? So
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
I know that's all they used to teach us in history class about like, the Ottoman Empire and how like they usurped parts of Romania and all the leaders they would fight against them. And then at one point, more recently, we were a communist country, and while we weren't under, I think, Russian rule, we were definitely under a lot of influence from that point of view. So
Wow, I didn't know that. I always saw Romania as like an independent, somewhat of a democracy. I mean, I think it is now, but you're saying
mhm.
at one point it was under communist rule or
Oh yeah.
was a communist country. How long ago was that?
1989 is when we we became, a democracy. So um, the I think he was a president, I guess the dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu. He came to power maybe in like the 50s, and the whole country was under communistic rule under his name. And I think he had pretty close ties to Russia. Because I mean, that's all my parents would talk about was, and not just my parents, like family and everybody that was old enough to understand what was happening. Growing up was all I would hear, what it was like under Ceausescu, and how you would wait in line, to buy eggs, milk, meat, and you were lucky if you even, got to be your turn and actually bought anything, like some days you'd have milk, some days you would have eggs, some days you would have oil, like cooking oil, some days you'd have meat. And a lot of families would have like family members and even property in the country where they would pretty much grow their own food because of that. So they created some type of self-sufficiency in terms of having something to eat, but getting by with things like cigarettes, they weren't around. Not everybody could afford cigarettes, or not everybody had like a camera to take pictures. That was like big. Everything was done on the black market. If you wanted I don't know, like some type of sweets or even music. I remember when we first moved to the US, my parents started listening to the radio and to music, and they would be like, oh my God, that's who this is. Like they would know so many songs from like back in like the 70s and 80s, but they had no idea who the singer or the band was or what they would even say. And they're like, oh my God, all this time, 20 years later, I know what this song means and what it says. And it has a different impact because everything back then was, hush hush. Nobody could really know, everything and anything. And
So
radio was monitored, TV was on for like 2 hours a day, and it's like it was crazy.
that's wild, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like, like, and again, like, you think of what we have in this country. I mean,
Hmm.
it's pretty easy to get some milk. It's pretty
Yeah.
easy to get some bread. It's pretty easy to access information, and it's
Oh
pretty
yeah.
easy to turn on the TV and get some news that's not state run. And
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of it's crazy because now I'm like jogging, like I'm like, yeah, of course, like communism was huge in like the 80s, right, over in a lot
Hmm.
of European countries. And I'm like, yeah, that completely makes sense. I mean, 89, gosh, my wife and I, we were in Budapest.
Yeah.
We were by the American embassy, and
Hmm.
we heard, I mean, in some of the buildings there's still like bullet holes and stuff where,
Yeah. You'll still
essentially,
find that in some buildings. I think they've kept them on purpose, not patched up as part of like the history. But um, lately they've started to cover them up and like redo a lot of the buildings, make them look nicer and cleaner. But
yeah,
on the same storyline, like I didn't have, while we had a TV and I will say news because I think that was about the only thing that we saw. It was pretty much propaganda, and it was monitored to like 1 or 2 hours a day, if not every other day or so. But I had cartoons for the first time, I think when I was 11.
oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So
I distinctly remember the first time we got cable and we started flipping through channels, and we were just I guess I could say shocked and amazed more than anything that there was there was a channel designated just to cartoons, and it was Cartoon Network. And I remember that night, my parents and I literally sat and watched cartoons till like 1 in the morning. And we fell asleep watching TV because we were so just in awe of everything we were seeing. So
So 89, so like how did the communist regime fall? Like what happened? I mean, to go
um
from 89 to, it sounds like, communism, to a different form of government shortly after, like kind of what happened there?
if I remember correctly, I think it started with a rebellion on the part of like the blue collar people, specifically miners. And and again, my history is really bad, but I do remember watching TV, and Ceausescu had, I guess it was like a gathering of some sort in Bucharest, and though I don't even think it started in Bucharest, it may have started in another city in the west, Timișoara, and it was just pretty much they started walking in the streets and just basically complaining that they were sick and tired of the regime and just going against everything that was going on.
Was it violent? I mean, I would
Oh yeah,
imagine,
it,
yeah,
it got
'cause-
really violent. Yeah, a lot of people died. And I remember watching TV and pretty much seeing the media was just taken apart all of a sudden. Like these people just started showing up on like in the newsroom area, and they would force the media people to play the news live. And it was like hundreds of people in that room, and they just started talking about like Ceausescu's down, the regime's done, it's a new world, basically, everything that would come with something like that, with a change like that. But it was crazy. I mean, it is what you would imagine it to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
But you
like,
did see people hurt and like blood all over, and it was pretty violent. It did take a violent change for it to happen.
I would imagine, I mean, and I would also think that like there were a lot of like communist sympathizers that kind of
Oh, for
liked
sure.
that loved the way it was, and then you had the resistance, right?
For sure, for sure. They even say that the communist sympathizers actually took over the new government and created, and that's why there's so much corruption now in the government. And I don't even watch like Romanian TV anymore because it sickens me. It's like the
Yeah.
stuff that happens. I remember a couple of months ago or a year or so ago, my parents were telling me how they passed some law to prevent politicians that commit crimes of a certain sort not be basically arrested and imprisoned and not even pay fines. So it passed. So it's crazy, like the
Well,
stuff
yeah,
that can happen.
it's interesting. One thing, what is the saying here in the States, is nobody's above the rule of law, right?
Yeah,
And it's
not
interesting to like,
not
and
so
it's,
much.
yeah, well, look, I mean, you're right, right? I mean, it's, there's a lot of people that, there's some do get treated differently in regard
Yeah,
to law, right? But it's interesting, and I didn't even think through that. Like in Romania, as of recently, there's laws being created where politicians basically aren't held to the same standard as everybody else, or even there's laws written that says you can't be arrested for a certain type of crime while everybody else can.
yeah. I mean, again, this was a while ago. I don't know if
Yeah,
anything else happened since, but I know that they try to get away with a lot of stuff. It's all about money, and people know that there's corruption. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't lived there in a while, but I don't know to what extent, the younger generation is actually fighting to change things. I think I think they've just kind of either accepted the norm, or the majority of them are emigrating outside of the country. You have the divide, the economic divide between, the poor and the rich is just as big as it is in the US. And there are areas of the country where you'll drive in like whole towns and they're almost haunted because nobody lives there anymore. You'll see houses pretty much literally just like the walls, no windows, no doors, they're not, no floors, nothing. They were started to be, to be built and never finished because I guess at some point, people like me and younger people and even older individuals, they left, they went out in Europe and, worked their butts off and sent money back to, I guess, in hopes of coming or returning to the country and having a better life. But I don't think it ended as they had hoped it would. I think they found something better and just kind of left things as is. And I mean, I have a ton of family in England alone, and
Wow. So would you attribute all this just to like a lot of like what you're talking to now is just a lot of it's just political corruption? Is that and
that's
all
my impression, but I
yeah,
might be wrong. Yeah, I
sure.
do see there's a lot of influence. Like in Romania, from what I see, you either have connections in the government to help you navigate society and have things come your way. And by have things come your way, I mean money, obviously, but also you have to return that generosity in some way, um, and or you are just kind of sitting there not having anything. That's
Yeah.
why I think a lot of people just leave. And especially kids, like the younger generation, they'll go out into another country, whether it's Germany, Italy, Spain, England. They'll find any kind of job that helps them make money, and then they'll send to their families back home.
Yeah. So tell me about your family. You have any siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
Okay, so it was you and your parents
Yeah.
in Romania. And then what'd your parents do for work growing up?
So they both my mom finished college with a master's degree in geology. My dad finished with a master's in engineering, like mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know a lot about what my dad used to do, but my mom worked for, I guess, the equivalent of like the labor department here.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like an inspector supervisor. She would go to different companies and I guess, check on the paperwork that everything was in order legally and
Mm-hmm.
everybody was required to work and they had their documents and stuff.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. And then so gosh, so I think you said you were 11 years old when you moved here.
I
Is
was
that right?
13. Yeah,
13.
I had just turned 13. Um, yeah, so we came at the end of May 31st actually. So June 1st was our first official day here. Um, and we haven't looked back since.
Yeah, so I'm curious. So when you were growing up in Romania,
Mhm.
and look, you talk about having cartoons for the first time, and your parents tell you stories about kind of what they experienced in Romania in terms of, a lot of the state-run media, propaganda, and, obviously, struggling, in some instances to get food, etc. Right? I'm curious, what were you and your parents' perception of the United States while you were growing up?
Well, after the revolution in '89, things did improve a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we started to have a lot more access to the outside world. It wasn't as difficult with, in getting food and other supplies. the country was just a lot more open. So I think once or twice my dad even went to work outside of the country for a few months, just make some more money and then come back home. But in terms of the US, I mean, it was the 90s, so the US was doing really, really well back then. It was, I think, the Clinton years, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly. And it America, that's what we call it. It was the land of the free and the land of your dreams. And the notion of the American dream didn't really exist as the American dream, like, a white, like a white picket fence in front of like your
Yeah.
little, Cape Cod home with like green grass. Like that wasn't the notion that we had. It was that, we had possibilities and opportunities that were not available to us in Romania. Um, so it was all that we saw in movies. I mean, talk about propaganda. It was literally like talk about basically like all of the like famous 90s movies, from like Lethal Weapon
Yeah.
to what is it? I think like the first Rush Hour came out right before. It was Bronx, New York, or Brooklyn. That was all we knew about America. Um, and pretty much all of that was portrayed in there. The idea that if you worked hard, you had a good life, you had money, you had anything and everything you wanted, and that you could be anything you wanted. Possibilities were endless, and it
It's
was just
funny.
about how do we get there. That was pretty much
Yeah.
think anybody thought of.
It was so funny. Stas, when we were talking, she like said the same thing. Because
Yeah.
I asked that question every time.
Hmm.
Because and I'm gonna ask you a different one in a second, but she said the same thing. She was like, I grew up watching these movies. And I forget which one she referenced. Gosh, I'd have to go back, but it might have been like Home Alone, maybe.
Oh yeah, that too.
Was
Oh my
that?
gosh, that hit with me because
Yeah.
I've been staying at home by myself since I could remember. I mean, my grandparents were both teachers, so until they retired, I had to stay home by myself. I think as early as like 6 or 7. And seeing that movie for the first time, I was like, yes, I wonder if I could do some of that stuff. Yet I lived on like the third floor of like an apartment building.
Yeah.
So
But it's
yeah,
funny, like she said in the context of like, that's what I thought America would be, like Home Alone.
yeah,
And then she tells her story of like when she got here, where she started.
yeah.
It's like it's just interesting
It's
because
definitely a shock for everybody when they come here because your image, or our image from an immigrant point of view, our image of what America stands for or looks like is totally different than what's portrayed in movies. It's
sure.
super fantilized. Not fantilized. Like it's such a fantasy that's created.
Where do you think that comes from? I mean, because everybody can, I hear the same thing. Like, like when you were young and and let me ask you this question. Like you and your family, I'm assuming, because I don't have the full story yet, but you made a specific decision to come to the US when there probably were some other options, right? I mean, there's other countries that I would imagine you wouldn't have had the same challenges or whatever the friction was, the reason you left. There were probably other places you could have gone, I would imagine, or no.
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think the idea of America was so strongly ingrained in my my dad. My dad was the one that made the decision to come here, and my mom just kind of like, sure.
Yeah.
And I pretty much took that to the extreme, because the minute I heard we could be moving to America, I was like, yes, let's do
Yeah.
it. Though I was like a child and I had no clue what it really meant. But you know, to take it back to the movies, I think it's done the way it is because of the need to emphasize stories. And
Mhm.
you need extremes in a movie, at least from my point of view and from where I come from. You know, you have to have extremes in order to have a point come across.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's not going to have the same impact. But maybe if we wouldn't have come to the US, maybe at some point I would have emigrated somewhere in Europe when
Sure.
or once Romania joined, you know, the European Union.
How recent's that? When did that happen?
I think maybe like 5, 6 years, maybe a
Okay,
little
it's
more,
relatively
maybe a
new.
little more. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I
And then
want, let's say in the last 10 years.
what like, obviously, what are some of the things that are you notice, or what are the things that happen that are positive by joining the European Union?
Well, first and foremost, people can travel in between countries
Yeah,
without
yeah.
any need of permission or a visa. Like I was just in Europe in June, and we had to cross from Switzerland to Italy, and it was literally walking across a bridge, but we walked through a building which was supposed to be, I guess, the place where they would check passports and make
Mhm.
sure we're crossing. Nobody even looked at us.
So
And
it's kind of like traveling here, but among states.
yes, basically.
So that was a big deal getting in the European Union for Romania.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they had doors open to, you know, to jobs primarily. So
Okay.
yeah.
So why do you think your dad was like so interested in America?
I don't honestly, I don't think I've ever asked him that question. I
Yeah.
just know from my mom, it was his choice. Yeah.
Hmm.
And you know, we came here, I don't know how everybody else immigrated, but we came here via the visa lottery that the US has.
Yeah. So
So
tell me about that. Like, how does like just talk to me about like the act. So let's back up. Sorry, I'm getting ahead
mhm,
of myself. So the decision's made, right?
yeah.
You want to come to the United States, and then so like what happens next? I mean,
Well,
what do?
I don't know what the process is like now. I'm pretty sure it's similar to the way it was before. Like you basically put in an application and the selection of the applicants are pretty much via a lottery. It could be anybody. And then once they pull your application via the lottery, they will review your file, make sure you have all of the documents that you need. They call you to an interview, and it's at the interview that they tell you yes or no. And I remember when we went to our interview, I remember people, I think we were like the third or the fourth in line, and everybody before us was turned away. Like I distinctly remember seeing everybody like walking away crying, like the women, and like the men were really sad. And then when we went up to like the window, because it's kind of like a teller, like at like a teller window in a bank, or at
Right.
least that's what I remember. And I couldn't even reach like the desk. I was so short. And my parents were talking to the individual, and they're all American, by the way, like nobody working there because it's at the embassy.
Mhm.
They started asking my parents questions about the paperwork, and then all of a sudden, and this is a funny story, all of a sudden they're like, and your daughter here, Laura, where is she? Oh, she's right here. I'm like, oh, hello. I didn't know any English, so I was talking
Mhm.
in Romanian. They're like, and then he goes, and your name's Laura? And I'm like, yes. And then, are you a terrorist?
It's a weird
And
question to
I looked at
ask.
my mom and dad. I'm like, ha ha ha. And they're laughing. Dude was serious,
What
like
year was
straight
this?
faced.
What year was this?
98,
Okay, this is
98,
100. Okay, that's an interesting
98.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. And I was like, no, what's a terrorist? I don't know what that is. Like I was 13. Like
Hmm.
who asks a child that question?
But you remember it.
I remember
Yeah, right.
because it
Yeah.
was so different, you know. But and they tell us, okay, you're accepted. Here's your file. You have, and I think they gave us a deadline of like 6 months to travel.
To get to
So
the United States.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. So in that 6 months, you I think we also had to provide a sponsor here. So
Hmm.
we couldn't just come on our own. And luckily my parents had friends that they had gone to college with that had run out of the country, so to speak, prior to communism, like falling in
Hmm.
'89. They sneaked out of the country into the US as I think they asked for like asylum.
Yeah.
And they were able to get in touch with them, and pretty much they offered us a place to stay until, my parents could get on their feet, find jobs, save some money, and get a place of our own.
So I didn't, I don't think I asked you this, but if you had to say, like, generally what I see in these conversations is there's kind of one specific reason why, generally one reason or main reason why someone decides, because generally people love the country they're born. Like
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
probably a very patriotic Romanian, right? Like, and I would imagine, maybe not. I'll let you answer that. But look, I mean, for someone to leave their country, right?
Yeah,
Um, what would, if I asked your dad or your mom, like, hey, why did you leave? I mean, what was the,
for me.
okay, it's for you.
For me,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, we weren't poor. We weren't rich either. We were middle class. We had a pretty good life. I mean, we had a pretty decent sized house, so to speak. I mean, we lived in an apartment, but we
Yeah.
had like a 3-bedroom apartment, and not a lot of people could afford a 3-bedroom apartment back then. That was
So you
not
guys were
unheard
like,
of, but
you were
I
okay.
think we're pretty,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're pretty good. Did I have everything I want? Absolutely not. We didn't have a fancy car, or, we didn't go on vacations. Vacations were like camping on the beach for like 2 weeks in the summer. But yeah, they made the decision to come here for me. They wanted me to have, you know, endless opportunity at a better life. I guess they didn't think that me growing up in Romania was gonna offer me more than what I could have gotten here. And they were probably right. They were
Yeah.
probably right.
Okay. So really because, I've talked with those that left war-torn countries. I've talked with
Yeah,
those that they couldn't make a living or a good enough living to feed their family, right? I've
yeah,
talked to those that are like, I just didn't feel right here and I wanted to travel and I landed in America, right?
yeah,
So it's interesting, everybody's reason for leaving. So it sounds like yours was, look, we don't feel like our daughter has got all the opportunities that we think she should have. So let's go try
yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, my parents are certainly most likely going to return home when they retire.
Yeah.
So, well, besides the fact that I don't think that they could have a decent financial retirement here.
Yeah.
So, the standard of living in Romania is much smaller compared to the power of the dollar. So with whatever retirement they have here, they could live off in Romania almost like kings, if I could say it like that. So their
So
choice is to go back.
take what they've earned here in the States
Yeah.
to Romania and
Mhm.
they live like kings, maybe not
Yeah. Yeah.
kings, but better off.
But
Okay.
definitely better from, than they would here.
Yeah,
That's not going to be my choice. I don't see myself retiring
sure.
in Romania. I maybe on vacation 1 to 2 weeks at a time, but nothing more.
Well,
I mean, I
what's,
made my life here, so
yeah, it's interesting. You were 13 when you came to the States. I don't know. I think you said you were born in 85. Is that accurate?
yeah,
So you're 37.
7, yeah,
So you kind of lived here your whole life, almost.
yeah,
At
yeah,
least, the majority of it. So you said you had 6 months to move here, right?
yeah. We had a pretty short time period to, for my parents to decide, and that basically meant, okay, I don't think they had I think, if I remember correctly, my mom said that we came with maybe like $5,000. Like, that was
That
all of
was
our
it.
savings. That was basically like we sold our car, we sold our furniture, we sold oh my God, my mom was so upset. They had like these old vinyl, like the discs, it's
Mhm.
like music, you know, and
Yeah, the
she had to
record.
sell that, the
Yeah.
records. Yeah, there you go. And she was so sad. We had like maybe like 20 or 30 that my dad bought when he went to work in Russia. And he was just, my mom was upset because like those were her records, like that was her music. And pretty much everything we had to sell so we can make money and be able to move here.
You came with $5,000.
Yeah,
Probably what, suitcases with your clothes? I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's interesting. I'll never forget, like you mentioned, like the vinyl records. When we came, my mother sold, we did a whole garage sale, same
yeah,
thing. Now the reality is, I always say this too, is like we were a pretty privileged family. So
yeah.
so we're very very grateful for that. But I do remember like the whole like selling everything,
Hmm.
and she sold our like this baby carriage that like she had all four of us in, and it
Oh,
was like an antique. And I'll never forget like how hard she cried when she had to sell that, you know.
yeah,
But that's, I mean, we sold everything too. I don't know how much she had in her pocket, and it was just clothes, right?
yeah, yeah, just
Where
close.
did you, so you said you had a sponsor here in the States, where?
Yeah, so my mom and dad went to college with this lady, I forget her name, but they lived in Abington, and they were able to get a hold of her and her husband through just common people that they knew. And they decided to sponsor us and keep us, you know, here and offer us accommodations. And we stayed with them for I think the whole summer. I want to say June, July, and maybe like mid-August of that year, until my parents were able to save enough money to get an apartment back then.
And what were they doing for,
That's
how were they?
so my dad and my mom found work at a factory
Okay.
because that was the only place they could get hired. And same thing. So they, the people we stayed with, put us in touch with, I guess, the Romanian community back then. And
Hmm.
somebody, one of those in members worked at the factory as a supervisor, and she said, we're hiring, come for an interview. Not my parents didn't speak any English.
Hmm.
And they started working at, I think back then it was like $5 an hour, 5.25, and they pretty much worked the entry line, like the assembly line, and that's all they did. And my mom actually got sick a couple of months later because it was so hard for her. They would wake up in the morning, walk to the bus for an hour, take the bus for another hour to the factory, work, I think, from like 7 in the morning, maybe 8 until like 4 or 5 o'clock. And then again, take the bus for an hour back home and then walk from the bus station another hour to the house. And that was while we lived in Abington for those 2.5 months at these people's house that they were pretty much strangers. And it wasn't easy.
Talk about
My life was miserable.
Well, talk about a sacrifice too. If I remember correctly, think of the job your mom had in Romania. I mean, that's a pretty nice job, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
works for the
It
government.
it was a shock. I mean, my dad too, you know,
Yeah.
he had a pretty good job as well, and he wasn't complaining. And to have to pretty much go from a white collar job at an office where you sit all day and, you know, talk to people on the phone and pretty much not do anything, to go to a blue collar job, physical labor. And it's not so much as that it's shameful as much
Yeah.
as for my parents it was, because the culture we come from, holding a white collar job is proper, and it's a lot more proper than a blue collar job. Here it's not, you know, it, I guess the views are different, and it took them a long time to accept that it's not as taboo, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's very admirable to have a blue collar job. In
Yeah,
fact, here in the States, I mean, it's without those blue collar type of jobs, and the people that occupy those jobs, I mean, the country's not the country.
Right. Yeah.
So,
My husband's a blue collar worker, so
yeah, it's
yeah.
good. I mean,
I certainly embrace it. It's not, to me, it's not shameful. I appreciate and admire hard work and
well,
and not that my parents don't, but it's just part of the culture. And at least back then, that's how it was, because there was a big emphasis on go to school, get a degree, get your master's maybe, and then, get a really good job. Ideally working banking, doctor, or lawyer. And I think that's kind of the story with most countries, maybe, and coming here was a pretty big shock for them that that wasn't the thing, and
you
it,
know,
it
it's
was it was pretty shameful for them in the beginning.
yeah, it's one thing I always like to say is like I call it the first generation immigrants, those that risked it all.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and everybody's got different stories, and some people come from privilege, some
Hmm.
or maybe they came with a bunch of money and they had some wealth and they just want to live in this country for the freedoms or whatever it may be. And then some really risked it all. I mean, think of what your parents went through.
Yeah,
I mean, look, established in
yeah,
Romania, didn't see a future for their family, sold everything, came with $5,000 in your suitcases, went and lived with somebody you really didn't know, but that acted as a sponsor who was seeking asylum. And then your
yeah,
parents come down in the type of job that they were doing or the perception of
yeah.
the job to something that was completely different. I mean,
Yeah, I
that's
think for
that
them it was
is
hard
yeah,
because they, so to give you a little bit of background on my parents, both of my parents were the first generation in our family that went to college in
oh
Romania,
wow.
both of them come from very simple homes. My dad's parents didn't even finish, I think, elementary school. My grandmother was a seamstress, my grandpa was a cobbler, and during communism, they lived in the basement of a home, like, I mean, basement,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
castle type basement with like stone walls, cold and wet, and you know, three siblings. It was hard. My mom's side, they come from the country as well. Both of my grandparents were teachers, and they had to fight for that transition to get to the city where things were better. And then, so my parents were that first generation of our kids finally made it, and they're better and much more well off than we are as the parents who pushed them up. And for them to come here to the US and pretty much take a step down or back down, I think that's what pretty much was a hit for my mom.
Yeah.
She got sick, I want to say maybe like 5 months later. The stress and the physicality of it all made her sick with thyroid gland. And she didn't know she had a problem. So for a
Oh,
long time, she just couldn't get out of bed physically. She was in pain, and it took her a
gosh.
couple of months to get diagnosed. My dad's just a workhorse, so he pulled through for the family a lot.
Did you all get any government assistance when you came? Or
No,
your okay, so your parents,
no, because so despite having a sponsor and despite having help, people don't really want to help too much
okay.
because I think there's a fear of if they help you, you might succeed more than they have.
Mhm.
So at least that's been our experience with those
Sure.
individuals that provided help. It's been limited
Sure.
in information. So it wasn't for quite a while before my parents even found out that we could get some type of financial aid from the government. And even then, they didn't want to because they were too proud.
Wow,
And my dad just worked a lot to to the point where he would bring in overtime money, and my mom took a break to get better, and then she went to school. She found this local school that was I
mhm.
forget what it's called. Well, I mean, it used to be called DPT, but I think it went out of business. It was a business school, and you would go to that school for a program for like 9, 10 months. And then you would get a certificate in like accounting or some type of secretarial work. And then that's what my mom did. She had to find some type of specialty for her to be able to work because none of their work experience from Romania was adequate here, was accepted. So
Yeah, and the reason I ask you about the assistance piece is like, what I've noticed is like that the work ethic from the first gen immigrant. The common thread is like, again, your story like resonates because I've heard it many times before.
yeah, I'm sure.
And first generation immigrants are very proud people.
Yeah.
And all of them, the majority, at least the ones I talk to, like have got like this fantastic work ethic and dedication and like, just finding ways to support their family, right?
Yeah.
And I contrast that to like sometimes what I see in the US today is somewhat of the opposite, right? Like, one thing I admire about your parents specifically is like, look, look what your mom did, right? She worked very hard,
Yeah.
saved up enough money, or somehow was financially able to go to the next level for some education. And then I'm assuming she got a pretty good job, or a better
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like went and took advantage, right? Now it wasn't
Yeah.
easy, but like a lot of people don't want to put in the work, in my opinion, right? And so I always love hearing stories like this because the first gen immigrant puts in the work. And I
Yeah.
firmly believe that, and all the stories are the same. So you probably, look, I bet you we haven't even got to the point of where you're at in your career, but I bet you probably put in the work and you were modeled that growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, as an immigrant, put in the work because you have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
You have to prove that you're good enough to be here to stay.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I didn't have it as bad as other friends of mine, but most of us get bullied for being an immigrant.
Mhm.
And I could probably count on my fingers how many times I heard go back to your country
Yeah.
um, in that first year alone. And you have to be able to adapt. It it's almost like becoming a chameleon, and you have to kind of give up your own culture in order to embrace being an American and in order to succeed, really.
Yeah.
And
One of the,
it's hard to have to do that because you kind of have to give up some of the things that you like or love in order to learn to love other things,
yeah.
and
And that's a shame, right? Because like I've been called Canuck. I'm from Canada, growing up as like and that's another reason why I feel like these stories are so important because like, look, first generation immigrants, in my mind, helped build this country, and immigrants, a lot of times like a bad connotation, right? I mean, look at your story. You came here, legally, you did
yeah,
it the right way. Your parents are working their ass off, but yet there's still this negative connotation. There shouldn't be.
yeah.
And that's
And
one of the reasons.
surprisingly enough, even my mom got bullied when
Yeah.
she got her first job after the factory. I think my dad lucked out a little bit from that point of view because the factory where he worked was only immigrants.
Yeah.
Very, very few individuals that worked there. I think maybe like upper management were
Yeah.
Americans, but everybody else was from another
Well,
country. But
and
my
that's why
mom got told, you need to go back to your country by Americans here at her first job, which coincidentally was a pretty big company, was a shoe company that's
Mhm.
fairly well known. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, look, that's why I do this podcast. I mean, we need to highlight great stories of great first gen immigrants that, came with nothing,
yeah,
worked their asses off and contributed to the country and took advantage. I mean, So to me, these are great stories that need to be shared, inspirational stories, because again, I mean, I believe immigrants feed America in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
So, what are you up to now, Laura?
Well, I guess I've been working for a company called Therapy Source.
Okay.
It's a staffing company. I've been here for about 10 years and I
Okay.
really like it. So I work in sales, but not so much where I actually sell a product, but we work with schools and we help schools find therapists for special education children. So,
Mhm.
I guess it's a job that makes me feel good and I
Yeah.
like it. I
And then
talk to people every day and,
yeah.
you know,
And then did you go to college here?
yeah, I went to
Okay.
college. That's another story. I started off at Drexel.
Okay.
Um, didn't have a lot of success there, and then I went to Temple and I started all over again. And that was just part of my struggle as an immigrant because it took
Mhm.
me a long time to find my place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
struggled with mental health a little bit. So
Okay.
yeah, but everything's
Um,
good now.
yeah, so look, I mean, coming, through college, sounds like you got a good career. You're married?
Yeah, been married for, wow, 7 years now. Oh gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have any children or
I have two dogs. Does that count? I have
yeah,
two
it counts.
legged children. Yeah,
It
two
counts.
boxers. They certainly keep me busy all the time.
Yeah.
They're silly.
So 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 talk to me a little bit about like, assimilation, right? You kind of mentioned it earlier, like you kind of gotta
Yeah.
mold into the American way, right? And I don't know, like what are some things that when you look at assimilation or things about the country that you're grateful for?
Opportunity. I think it's it's hard to explain what opportunity really means because it depends. It's subjective, I think,
Yeah.
for, it's different for everybody. But for me, I can say that if I lost my job today, I could probably find another job tomorrow and I would still not get hungry, regardless of whether it was working at Wawa or finding another corporate position.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know if that would be a possibility for me in Romania. So I'm grateful from that point of view. I'm happy because here I can do anything I want, literally. Um,
So it's
I
so
have I just have to have the desire to want to do it.
yeah, it's so funny. It's, you know, my wife's grandfather, he was born in Italy, and he said here in the States, and I said this on the last podcast, but here in the States, you can do what you want.
Yeah.
In other countries, you do what you can.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and that resonated with me. And look, like your story's like awesome because like it helps me understand, wow, like I've never been in a position where I was ever going to be potentially had challenges with work, food, like a lot of the necessities in life, right? And now you're saying, hey, here in the States, what's great is I've got all this. If I can go find a job, an opportunity, and make money and feed my family, where you're saying maybe back in Romania that wouldn't be the case. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I have to move back, I think I would probably have to teach English because
Yeah.
I don't know what else I could be doing unless if I were to find some type of company that has international connections and
Mm-hmm.
needs somebody that could speak English because that's about as far as I could go for them. Um, but for here, for the US, it's desire that you have to have. You have to have the desire to want to do something because everything else just comes.
Yeah.
And it sounds cheesy because I don't want it to sound like you attract what you put out into the world. But it is
Yeah.
it is.
Well, look, I love this story. On, so many different levels.
Thank you.
Again, where you were, I'm grateful, and every American should be grateful that although we're imperfect,
Yeah.
right, as an organization, we don't have we don't have a government that we're not a communist government. Let's just, right.
Mhm.
So like, that's number one. Number two, what your parents had to endure. I
Yeah.
mean, talk about admirable, courageous, to leave their country. And oh, by the way, they were in a pretty good position, but to want something better for you. And then
Yeah.
to come to the States with nothing, to work the jobs they were working, to provide, and then, sometimes I hear too, like, a lot of time it's not the first generation immigrant that reaps the reward of America. It's
Mhm.
the second and the third.
Yeah.
Right. So now I'm like, if you ever have children, right, think of what your children will grow up in versus what your parents had to endure or you growing up.
Absolutely. I mean, I already feel like I'm at a different level than where my parents were at, you know.
Mhm.
I feel I have a really good job. I didn't have to start working at $5 an hour. And automatically that puts me at an advantage
Mhm.
than where they were. And the things that I'm doing right now in my life for my retirement are probably going to, if I do decide to have kids, they're going to be set even better than I was.
Yeah.
So it's a trickle down effect. You're right.
Yeah.
It definitely gets better as it goes by, for the generations to come.
So I always ask this question too, or not always. I like to ask this question. One of the reasons I'm doing the podcast, I said at the start, is
Hmm.
look, we're a country that is not perfect. I said that earlier, and there are some legitimate grievances, right?
Yeah.
But I think the net is, I still believe it's an exceptional place because
Hmm.
of the stories I hear like yours. But yet, I see surveys where like 38-40% of the country, feels like this isn't a great place to live anymore. And then you hear people saying, I hate the United States and the dream is dead, right? I firmly disagree with it. I guess my question is, what would you say to those people that say those things, knowing your story?
I think people have to understand that you're used to being entitled. I
Yeah.
think that's what it is. You're used to being entitled. And the reason I say that is because of, for example, my job. Like I said, I recruit providers, therapists to provide services like speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, tutoring to kids with special needs. That's not a thing in Romania.
Mm-hmm.
For all I know, that's probably not a thing in other countries as well. Maybe not countries like France, Spain, Germany, or Italy. I don't know. I can't speak to those, but I can speak to Romania. I can speak that it's probably gotten better now because it's 2022, but when I left, special education children were put in homes, in asylums
God.
for the handicapped.
Wow.
Yeah, nobody, you would walk down the street and you would not see a person in a wheelchair. The only people walking with a cane were the elderly. So I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to offer services to people that would not normally get them somewhere else, and that's something that you have to be mindful of. And if that's just on the education side, you can only imagine how much more of an impact you can have in your life outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the US is a capitalist country. It's in the name. You can make your money, you can make your success, you can make your dream. Keyword make. no one's going to give it to you. So you have to get it. And that's kind of what I learned. And, you know, I'm working on it, just like my parents are, just like my husband and my friends are. You know, you have to make your own success, but you have to want to. You can't expect to be handed everything on a platter, you know. I have a friend who's starting med school at 40 years old. She's Romanian like me, emigrated, you know, in 2004. So, you know, she started school, she went to college at 35, 36. Like, that's what she wants. So she made it happen. You have the opportunity, you just have to get it. That's it.
Well, I'll tell you with that, Laura, look, I appreciate it, you joining.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I've
Thank you
got a
for having me.
yeah, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for you,
Thank you.
for your parents, for the journey that they took, for the level of effort that they put in to make sure that their daughter has a better life in this country. And I'm also grateful that you recognize that, you know, all the things you do have here. And my goal is your story resonates with others, and other people that have been here or born here also start to say, you know what, I'm pretty grateful as well. So,
Hope so.
thank you so much for joining. This was a real treat, and best of luck.
Thank you so much again. Have a great day.
Thanks, Laura.